Usually, when we think about a master musician, we picture someone locked in a room.
Right, entirely focused on mastering an object.
Yeah, exactly. A piece of wooden wire,
Yeah.
like a guitar or a violin or a piano.
Mm-hmm.
You press a specific key, you get a specific note. It's reliable. It's completely predictable.
It's a solitary pursuit, really. You learn the physical mechanics of that object until it basically becomes, an extension of your own body.
But what if your instrument wasn't an object at all?
Oh, that's the big question.
Right. What if your instrument was a room full of living, breathing, fiercely independent humans?
That's a whole different ball game.
I mean, what if the keys on your piano could talk back to you? Or, have a terrible day, or just completely change the melody you just spent hours writing?
That recipe for chaos was the actual reality for Edward Kennedy, Duke Ellington.
Yeah.
And managing that chaos wasn't just some parlor trick. It was literally the foundation for some of the most transcendent music of the 20th century.
So to figure out how a teenager who initially, preferred playing baseball and couldn't even read music.
Which is wild.
It really is. To figure out how he evolved into what critic Ralph J. Gleason called America's most important composer, we're taking a deep dive into how Ellington survived a notoriously volatile music industry for over half a century.
And he did it by treating his entire orchestra, rather than just the piano, as his true instrument.
All while absolutely refusing to be put in any sort of artistic box. Okay, let's unpack this.
To really understand Ellington, we have to strip away that iconic image of, the elder statesman of jazz and the tailored tuxedo.
Right, the legend.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We have to go back to the very beginning, to Washington, D.C. in 1899. His journey is defined just as much by his entrepreneurial hustle and his environment as it is by his raw musical talent.
He was born into a proud, middle-class African-American family, and both of his parents actually played the piano.
Yeah, his dad liked operatic arias and his mom played parlor songs.
So music was definitely around. But they lived in a community that actively worked to insulate and protect its children from the harsh, violent realities of the era's Jim Crow laws.
Which was so crucial. His mother intentionally surrounded him with dignified women to teach him manners, elegance, and really a profound sense of self-worth.
And that ingrained elegance stuck with him, permanently.
Oh, absolutely. Even as a young kid, his friends noticed he had this casual, dapper way of dressing.
Right.
He had this remarkably noble bearing. It was actually his childhood friend, Edgar McEntee, who decided that a kid with that kind of presence needed a title to match his vibe.
Which is so funny, just assigning your friend a royal title.
Right, but that is how he got the nickname Duke.
But young Duke was absolutely not holed up practicing his scales. He famously skipped his piano lessons.
He wrote later in his life that he felt the piano just wasn't his talent. He was way more interested in baseball.
Yeah, he even remembered a day when President Teddy Roosevelt was riding by on his horse and actually stopped to watch Duke and his friends play a game. And his very first paying job wasn't playing gigs. He was selling peanuts at Washington Senators baseball games.
The music bug didn't genuinely bite him until he was a teenager. He started sneaking into Frank Holliday's pool room, and hearing the rough, rhythmic playing of the pool room pianist is what finally ignited his fascination with the keyboard.
And when he finally does start composing, it is purely by ear.
Entirely.
Like in the summer of 1914, he is working as a soda jerk at the Poodle Dog Cafe, and he creates his very first piece of music, the soda fountain rag.
But the catch is, he hasn't learned to read or write music yet.
Right. He is like a brilliant software hacker who doesn't actually know the fundamental coding language yet.
That's a perfect way to put it.
He just figures out incredibly clever workarounds to get the system to do what he wants.
And what's fascinating here is how that specific limitation, not being able to read sheet music, actually revealed his innate foundational genius for arrangement.
How so?
Well, to understand the mechanics of what he was doing, you just have to look at how he performed that one piece of music. He would sit down and play the soda fountain rag as a waltz.
Which means he was playing it in a sweeping 3/4 time signature.
Exactly. Then he would shift the rhythmic accent and play the exact same melody as a tango with that sharp, syncopated 4/4 drive.
Wow.
And then he'd smooth it out and play it as a standard foxtrot.
And he was doing all of this just so the listeners at the cafe wouldn't realize he was playing the exact same song over and over again.
He essentially hacked the piano.
Yeah.
Long before he formally studied harmony with a high school music teacher, this ability to manipulate a single melody into entirely different moods, tempos, and genres, That became the DNA of his entire career.
It's amazing.
He was teaching himself how to stretch music, how to disguise it, and how to make it serve the exact emotional needs of the room.
Which makes it even more incredible to think he almost didn't pursue music as a career at all.
Right, he turned down an art scholarship.
Yeah, to the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn. He dropped out of high school, where he was studying commercial art just 3 months before graduation, to chase this musical hustle.
And hustle really is the only word for it.
Seriously.
Yeah.
He starts a freelance sign painting business, and his strategy is brilliant.
Oh, I love this part.
When a customer would ask him to paint a sign for a dance or a party, he would casually ask if they had already booked the musical entertainment.
Just sliding that in there.
Right. If they said no, he'd offer to play. He was cross-selling his own band.
He was his own booking agent, his own promoter, and his own manager, but, the local D.C. scene could only contain that kind of ambition for so long.
Sure.
When his drummer, Sonny Greer, had an invitation to join a band in New York, Ellington followed him, plunging headfirst into the explosion of art and culture that was the Harlem Renaissance.
But Harlem in the early 1920s was intensely competitive.
Brutal.
They were hustling pool by day just to buy food and playing whatever cramped rent house parties they could find at night for a few dollars.
The competition from elite stride pianists was so fierce, they actually got discouraged and retreated back to D.C. for a brief period.
I can imagine.
But they regrouped, returned to New York, and eventually secured a solid 4-year engagement at the Hollywood Club in Manhattan.
And that residency was crucial. It gave them a stable laboratory to develop a highly specific sound.
Yeah, they weren't just playing generic, polite dance music anymore.
Right. They were actively incorporating the raw street rhythms of Harlem. They were experimenting with high squealing trumpets and exotic, aggressive trombone tones.
Which perfectly sets the stage for 1927.
Yes.
The legendary Cotton Club needs a new house band. King Oliver, who was a massive name at the time, actually turns the gig down because he felt the pay was too low.
Big mistake.
Massive. So Ellington's agent, Irving Mills, who, by the way, negotiated a staggering 45% interest in Ellington's future for himself.
Ouch.
Yeah. But he secures Ellington the audition. Ellington lands the job, and almost overnight, he is broadcasting weekly on the radio to the entire nation.
That radio wire inside the Cotton Club is what transforms him into a national sensation.
You really have to picture the environment, The Cotton Club was a strictly segregated, highly exclusive venue for a wealthy white clientele.
Right.
It featured elaborate revues that mixed comedy, dance, and the allure of illicit prohibition alcohol. And Ellington was tasked with providing the continuous, evocative soundtrack to all of this spectacle.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though.
Okay.
It's not just that he was writing incredibly catchy songs. It's the actual mechanics of how he was writing them. Let me go back to that opening analogy of the instrument.
The human instrument.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Ellington didn't sit down at a desk and write a generic trumpet part or a standard saxophone part. He was like a bespoke tailor.
I love that.
He wrote specifically for the physical quirks, the emotional tendencies, and the unique talents of the human sitting in the room with him. Like, he wrote Jeep's Blues, specifically to highlight the melodic swoops of Johnny Hodges. He built the worldwide hit Creole Love Call entirely around Bubber Miley's famous jungle-style trumpet playing.
And to understand why that is so revolutionary, we have to look at the mechanics of what Bubber Miley was actually doing.
Right, because it wasn't standard playing.
Not at all. Miley wasn't just hitting notes on a page. He was using a rubber toilet plunger as a mute over the bell of his trumpet.
Which is wild.
Rapidly opening and closing it while simultaneously humming and growling in the back of his own throat.
I mean, the coordination that takes.
It's incredible. The resulting sound didn't even sound like a brass instrument. It sounded like a human voice crying or laughing or moaning.
Yeah.
You cannot notate that on a piece of sheet music. A classical conservatory student cannot just sit down and sight read a Bubber Miley solo.
Because Ellington wasn't writing for the trumpet. He was writing for Bubber Miley.
Exactly the distinction that overturns hundreds of years of classical tradition.
Right.
In a traditional symphony orchestra, the ultimate goal is uniformity and interchangeability. A classical composer writes a middle C on the page, and any highly trained violinist from Vienna to Tokyo should be able to sit down and play it exactly the same way.
The human musician is supposed to be entirely subordinate to the written score.
Right. But Ellington proved that a jazz orchestra didn't have to be a rigid, interchangeable machine. It could be a living, breathing ecosystem.
There's this great story about when the fiery soprano saxophonist Sidney Bechet joined the band for a short time.
Oh, yes?
Bechet brought this incredibly heavy, dominant New Orleans influence that completely clashed with the other players.
Totally different vibe.
But Ellington didn't force Bechet to tone it down or sound like everyone else. He absorbed that friction and made it part of the music.
He just embraced it all. The dissonant trombone growls, the bent blues licks, and the distinct tonal personality of every single player.
He famously said that he thought too strongly in terms of altering his music to fit the performer, to be impressed by accidental music.
Which is just a profound philosophy of human management, really. He understood that extracting the maximum potential from a group of people means managing the specific person in the role, not just managing the role itself.
But surviving the Roaring Twenties is one thing. Surviving the 1930s is a completely different reality.
Oh, yeah. The Great Depression hits.
The recording industry absolutely craters. They dropped something like 90% of their artists by 1933.
And then the swing era takes over.
Right. Youth culture suddenly wants incredibly fast, highly standardized, wildly danceable music for the jukeboxes. Benny Goodman is crowned the new king of swing.
It was a massive cultural shift that forced most band leaders into a corner. Bands were financially pressured to prioritize simple danceability over harmonic complexity just to drive record sales and secure touring bookings.
But Ellington completely refuses to dumb down his music.
He wouldn't do it.
No. He survives this period by finding a musical soulmate and actually leaning further into complexity. In 1939, he brings on a young composer and arranger named Billy Strayhorn,
who they called Sweet Pea.
Right. And Strayhorn's arrival coincides with what jazz historians often consider the absolute creative peak of the group, known as the Blanton-Webster era.
This is when tenor saxophonist Ben Webster and bassist Jimmy Blanton joined the band.
And we really need to pause on Jimmy Blanton because he single-handedly revolutionized the double bass.
Absolutely.
Before Blanton, the bass in a jazz band was essentially a percussion instrument. Its job was just to play a heavy, thudding root note on the downbeat to keep the rhythm.
But Blanton changed the physical mechanics of playing the instrument.
He really did.
He didn't just walk the bass line, he turned it into a melodic voice.
He plucked the strings harder to create a sustaining, resonant tone. He pioneered playing rapid eighth notes, adding complex passing tones, and actually playing intricate counter melodies right alongside the horn section.
He turned a background rhythm tool into a frontline solo instrument.
Exactly.
Wait, I have to push back here for a second, though.
Sure, go ahead. If Ellington is this unparalleled, once-in-a-generation genius who writes these brilliant bespoke arrangements tailored to people like Blanton and Webster, why bring in a co-writer at all? I mean, why did he need Billy Strayhorn?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it really comes down to the limits of that early informal education we talked about in D.C.
Okay, the hacker analogy.
Right. Ellington learned by ear. He was a master of the vignette, the mood, the 3-minute masterpiece. But Billy Strayhorn had a rigorous, formal background in classical music theory.
Ah, I see.
He understood the complex mathematical musical architecture required to build a symphony. Strayhorn became, in Ellington's own words, his right arm, left arm, my brain waves in his head, and his in mine.
Wow. So they were filling in each other's blind spots.
Precisely. Ellington had the raw, human, blues-soaked foundation, and Strayhorn had the architectural blueprints. Together, they aimed to elevate jazz to the structural level of classical symphonies.
Because Ellington was incredibly frustrated by the standard 3-minute limit of the 78 RPM record.
He hated that constraint.
He wanted to tell much longer, more historically complex stories. So, with Strayhorn's classical chops helping to structure these massive ideas, Ellington starts writing extended suites.
This leads to works like Black, Brown, and Beige, which he debuted at Carnegie Hall in 1943.
That's a huge deal.
Huge. It was a massive, sweeping piece dedicated to telling the sprawling history of African Americans, the pain of slavery, and the resilience of the church.
He also composed Jump for Joy, which was a full-length musical challenging incredibly heavy themes of African American identity.
And Hollywood heavyweights like Charlie Chaplin and Orson Welles actually offered to direct it.
Though it never quite made it to Broadway, unfortunately.
No, but he was taking massive, unprecedented artistic swings.
And those long-form pieces were rarely commercial successes. I mean, the critics at the time often didn't know what to do with them.
They really didn't.
But Ellington was steadfast. He once said, "Jazz is music, swing is business."
That's a great quote.
It is. Think about a moment in your own career where you had to make a choice. A choice between chasing a popular, highly profitable trend, the swing, and staying entirely true to the depth, nuance, and richness of your own craft, the jazz.
That's a tough call.
Ellington knew his band could swing hard enough to pack a dance floor, but he knew their ultimate strength was mood, nuance, and deep composition. He consistently chose the music over the business, even when it cost him financially.
And following World War II, that choice very nearly cost him his entire livelihood.
Oh, definitely.
The big band era effectively died in the late 1940s. The economics of keeping 20 musicians on the road just became impossible.
Travel costs skyrocketed.
And the government imposed a hefty entertainment tax on dancing that absolutely devastated club owners.
Right. The club owners couldn't afford a 15-piece orchestra. So popular tastes rapidly shifted away from big bands toward solo vocalists like Frank Sinatra and Joe Stafford, backed by small, cheap studio combos.
Even giants like Count Basie had to disband their entire ensembles for a while just to avoid bankruptcy.
And by the early 1950s, Ellington loses incredibly key personnel. His lifelong drummer, Sonny Greer, leaves. His star saxophonist, Johnny Hodges, leaves.
It was a mass exodus.
By 1955, Duke Ellington does not even have a regular recording contract. It genuinely looked like his best days were 20 years behind him.
But you can never count out a master adapter.
Nope.
The turning point comes on July 7, 1956, at the Newport Jazz Festival.
This is legendary.
It is approaching midnight. The crowd is exhausted and starting to leave. Ellington is visibly annoyed because 4 of his key players had shown up late, forcing him to play a truncated, unimpressive set earlier in the evening.
So he's looking for something to wake the crowd up.
Exactly. He calls for a piece that had been in the band's book since 1937, a 2 older, driving blues tunes bridged together called Diminuendo and Crescendo in Blue.
And he tasks his tenor saxophonist, Paul Gonsalves, to play the solo interlude connecting the 2 pieces.
And what happens next is the stuff of absolute legend. Gonsalves steps up to the microphone and plays a marathon, 27-chorus solo.
Which is insane.
Right. To understand the mechanics of why this caused such a riot, you have to understand what a chorus is. A chorus is one complete trip through the song's harmonic chord progression.
Okay.
Playing 27 of them consecutively is a superhuman marathon of physical stamina for a horn player's lungs and embouchure.
Just structurally, it's mind-blowing.
And more importantly, it is a masterclass in harmonic tension. Gonsalves just kept riding the driving, relentless rhythm of the bass and drums, building the tension higher and higher, refusing to resolve the melody.
And the crowd goes from sleepy to an absolute unhinged frenzy.
Oh, completely.
People are dancing on chairs. The festival organizer is frantically signaling Ellington to stop the show because they are way past the local curfew.
But Duke just keeps pushing the band harder.
It is the 1950s equivalent of a viral internet moment.
Yes.
It completely resurrects his career overnight, proving that live, unpredictable electric human energy is simply impossible to manufacture in a sterile recording studio. It lands him on the cover of Time magazine, which was almost unheard of for a jazz musician at the time. And it leads to the best-selling LP of his entire career, Ellington at Newport.
Although there is a truly fascinating, slightly scandalous footnote to that famous live album.
Oh, do tell.
The producer, George Avakian, revealed decades later that Ellington actually wasn't happy with the live recording.
Really?
Yeah. He felt the band was under-rehearsed and the microphones hadn't captured the sound properly, so the very next day they went into a studio, meticulously re-recorded about 60% of the album, and then mixed in faked, canned sounds of a cheering crowd.
That is wild.
They didn't tell anyone. The true, unedited, authentic concert recording wasn't properly released to the public until 1999.
Wow. It is a brilliant bit of music industry sleight of hand. But, whether the album was spliced or not, the immense cultural capital he gained from that night at Newport was very real.
It was. This raises an important question, though. How did a man in his late 50s spend that sudden rush of renewed capital?
Because he easily could have just toured the greatest hits, played Take the A Train every night for wealthy audiences, and enjoyed a comfortable retirement as an elder statesman.
But resting on his laurels is not what he does. Instead, he and Strayhorn dive headfirst into film scoring.
Yeah.
And they score Anatomy of a Murder in 1959. This is a massive cinematic milestone. It is the first significant Hollywood film music by an African-American composer that was non-diegetic.
Meaning, the music wasn't just a band playing in the background of a nightclub scene while the actors talked.
Exactly.
The music was the actual invisible, dramatic score driving the emotional tension of the movie itself.
He also embarks on relentless, grueling global tours. He spends a significant part of each year playing overseas, financed by the U.S. State Department.
And he doesn't just play for foreign audiences. He actively absorbs the sounds of the globe.
Oh, yeah. He listens to the local scales, the indigenous rhythms, and the unique instruments of the countries he visits, and translates them directly into his orchestra.
This results in breathtaking, culturally expansive works like the Far East Suite, the Latin American Suite, and the Afro-Eurasian Eclipse.
He is literally pulling the diverse sounds of the globe into his American Jazz Orchestra.
He was finally putting his deepest personal philosophy into full practice.
Yeah, he famously embraced the phrase beyond category. He actively disliked the word jazz, feeling it was a restrictive box designed to marginalize Black artists.
Right.
He considered it a liberating principle to simply write American music or world music. He adamantly refused to be categorized by genre, by era, or by race.
So what does this all mean? Let's look at the sheer staggering scale of the legacy he leaves behind.
It's massive.
Over 1,000 copyrighted compositions. It is the largest recorded personal jazz legacy in history.
Yeah.
He wins 14 Grammy Awards.
Yep.
He receives the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the French Legion of Honor, and a posthumous Special Pulitzer Prize in 1999 for his lifelong contribution to music.
And in 2009, he became the first African-American to appear by himself on a circulating U.S. coin.
The District of Columbia quarter, appropriately showing him seated at a piano.
His harmonic influence is just embedded in the absolute bedrock of modern music. Stevie Wonder wrote the massive pop hit Sir Duke as a direct tribute to him.
Oh, of course.
Icons like Miles Davis, Charles Mingus, and Dave Brubeck all composed heartfelt elegies and musical tributes to his genius. He literally shifted the paradigm of American music.
There is one final reality about his life that really makes you pause, though.
Okay.
Think about all of those massive, secular, toe-tapping hits. Mood Indigo, It Don't Mean a Thing If It Ain't Got That Swing, Sophisticated Lady.
The classics.
These are the songs that literally defined American culture for decades and brought him immense global fame and incredible wealth.
Right.
But in September 1965, he premiered the first of his sacred concerts. He essentially created a massive, complex jazz Christian liturgy.
It was a shocking departure for a man known for cotton club reviews and swing dances.
Completely out of left field for some.
Yeah. It received highly mixed reviews, and many critics at the time viewed it cynically, assuming it was just a commercial attempt to tap into organized religion or, a symptom of aging.
But Ellington poured his own money into it. He composed and performed 3 of these sacred concerts over his final years, battling terminal illness to do so.
He brought his jazz orchestra, massive choirs, and even tap dancers directly into grand cathedrals.
It was experimental, it was deeply spiritual, and it was wildly commercially risky.
Very risky.
And when asked about it by reporters, Duke Ellington pointed directly to these sacred concerts and said simply, "That is the most important thing I've done."
He was placing his profound spiritual and artistic vulnerability far above his commercial triumphs.
So it leaves you with this question. How do we measure the true value of our own life's work? Is our greatest contribution the one that brings us the most fame, the most money, the loudest applause from the crowd?
Or is it the one that finally truly captures our authentic soul, even if the world doesn't quite understand it?
It's the stark difference between merely playing the notes people expect to hear and having the courage to play the music you were actually meant to write.
Exactly.
When your instrument is made up of human lives, of friction, of joy, and of faith, you don't just write a song. You build a world. And Duke Ellington built a world that was truly beyond category.